The lawyer's name was Patricia Morse, and she had the composed, unhurried manner of a woman who has delivered significant news to grieving families many times and understands that what they need from her is precision, not theater. She sat at the head of the conference table with a folder in front of her and waited for the room to settle. Before I take you through what she read, one quick thing. If someone has ever quietly rearranged the architecture of your life without announcing they were doing it, subscribe so the next story finds you, and tell me in the comments about the person who changed something for you without making a speech about it. I read every one. There were 6 of us in the room. My mother, in the chair directly across from me, in the gray blazer she wears for formal occasions. My father beside her, upright and careful in the way he is careful when he is in a situation he has not fully mapped. My sister Beth and her husband Martin, who had driven up from Salem the night before, and who I had not spoken to since the previous Christmas. Beth's mother-in-law Eleanor, who had been included because Beth had insisted, and who had the look of a woman who understood she was present for someone else's family event, and was trying to take up an appropriate amount of space, and me, in the chair closest to the window, which I had chosen deliberately because windows give you somewhere to look when the room becomes too much. My hands folded in my lap. My face arranged in the expression I had been practicing for 2 weeks, since the appointment with Patricia Morse's office had been scheduled. The expression of a person who is present and composed and who has not spent the preceding 6 months wondering what, if anything, Owen had intended for her. Patricia Morse opened the folder. She read through the standard portions of my grandfather Owen's will, which distributed his personal effects among the family in the expected ways: the furniture, the books, the car. She read through the provisions for the house. She read through the charitable bequests, which were Owen and entirely characteristic of him: the library in the town where he was born, the hospital that had treated my grandmother before she died, the marine conservation organization he had written checks to for 30 years. And then she turned a page. Here is what she read. Codicil to the last will and testament of Owen James Sinclair, executed on the 14th day of March. She read the year. She read the notary's attestation. She read the language of the codicil, which established a trust in the amount of $9,200,000, funded from Owen's investment accounts, to be administered by a named trustee for the sole benefit of one beneficiary, his granddaughter, Maeve Sinclair. The room was quiet. Patricia Morse looked up from the folder. She looked around the table, and then she said, with the professional steadiness of someone who has done this before, "Are there any questions about the codicil?" My mother had questions. She had several, and she delivered them in a rising sequence that I have heard before in other situations. The specific escalation of a person who is looking for an error and is becoming more urgent as each question fails to produce one. She asked whether the codicil had been witnessed correctly. It had. She asked whether Owen had been of sound mind at the time of signing. Patricia Morse produced the documentation. She asked whether other family members had been considered for the trust. Patricia Morse said she was not in a position to speak to Owen's considerations. My father was quiet in the way that is its own kind of volume, the quietness of a man who is doing arithmetic in his head and does not like the answer he is arriving at. Beth's mother-in-law Eleanor looked at the table for most of this. She was correct to understand that this was not her conversation. Martin, Beth's husband, said something that belongs in the category of things that reveal a person without adding anything useful to a situation. Beth looked at the table, then at Martin, then at me. Her face moved through several things in a sequence I recognized from growing up with her. The sequence of a person who wants to say something and is calculating whether saying it is survivable. She did not say it. Not in that room. I was looking at the date on the codicil, which Patricia Morse had slid across the table to my mother, and which my mother had dropped onto the table in front of her, and which I could read from where I sat. 14th of March. The Sunday dinners had been in early March. The first one, where it was said plainly for the first time, not as a question but as an expectation, where my mother said it's what family does, Maeve, while the rest of the table agreed in various registers of certainty, had been the first Sunday of March. The second one had been the following week. The second Sunday, the one where I sat at my grandfather's table and shook and said no, my condition makes this impossible, my body cannot tolerate this. That dinner had been the 7th. The codicil was dated the 14th. 1 week after I said no, my grandfather had been at both dinners. He had been at the first one where the expectation was stated and he had said nothing. He had been at the second one where I refused, shaking, and he had said very little. He had said enough, which was the specific and quiet version of enough he used when he meant a conversation was closed. And in the week between that dinner and the 14th, he had called Patricia Morse and added the codicil to his will. He had not told me. He had not, in the 6 months between the 14th of March and his death in September, said a single word to me about the codicil, about the trust, about what he had seen or decided. He had been at other Sunday dinners, at holidays, at ordinary visits in between. He had talked to me about his garden and the novel he was reading and the marine conservation news he followed, with the specificity of a man who had been following it for 30 years. He had not mentioned the 14th. Understanding who my grandfather Owen was is the important part of this story. Owen James Sinclair was 79 years old when he died. He had been a marine biologist for the first half of his life, fieldwork, publication, a position at a university in Oregon that he held for 22 years, and a science educator for the second, which meant writing and speaking and explaining the ocean to people who did not live their lives studying it, but who he believed deserved to understand it anyway. Both of those things were, at their core, the same thing, a commitment to seeing how systems actually work rather than how people wish they worked, and to telling the truth about what you observed, even when the truth was not what anyone particularly wanted to hear. He was precise, he was patient, he corrected errors gently and once, and then moved on, and the correction was not repeated because he trusted that you had heard it. He was the kind of man who did not make speeches about his values, did not announce what he believed, did not position himself publicly within family conversations as being on anyone's side, but who expressed those values consistently through the decisions he made and the things he paid attention to and the things he quietly declined to participate in. He had not made a speech at either Sunday dinner. He had not said what was being asked of me was wrong, or that the family was behaving badly, or that he disapproved. He had said enough, in the quiet version, which was the version that meant he had heard everything and had reached a conclusion, and the conversation was finished. The conclusion had been produced the following week, in Patricia Morse's office, in the form of a codicil, dated the 14th of March, and he had not told anyone about it. I think about why he didn't tell me. I have thought about it many times in the year since the will reading, and I keep arriving at the same answer. Telling me would have made the codicil about him, about his support, his opinion, his position in the family dispute. It would have drawn him into the conversation in a way that would have required him to defend a stance, and Owen was not interested in defending stances. He was interested in outcomes. He had observed the situation, reached a conclusion, and acted on the conclusion. The action was done. There was nothing to announce. There is also this: if he had told me, it would have changed how I experienced the months between March and his death in September. I would have known what he had done, and knowing it would have changed the texture of our time together, made it heavier, made it about the codicil and what it meant and the family and the Sunday dinners. He did not want those months to be about any of that. He wanted them to be about the novel he was reading and his garden and the marine conservation news and the ordinary accumulation of an ordinary relationship between a grandfather and his granddaughter. He gave me that instead of the announcement. In retrospect, it was the better gift. This is the thing about my grandfather I am still learning from. The difference between the act and the narration of the act. He did the act. He did not narrate it. The narration was handled 6 months later by the 14th of March. So let me take you back to the beginning of this, to the Sunday dinners, because the codicil without the context is just a number, and the number is not what the story is about. The story is about the date. And the date is about what happened on the 7th and the 14th of March at a table in Portland, Oregon, with 7 people and a lamb roast, and a conversation that nobody in that room, including my grandfather, handled exactly the way it should have been handled, except for the part that happened afterward, in the week after, quietly, in a lawyer's office, without anyone's knowledge. My sister Beth has a daughter named Lily, who is 3 years old now and healthy, and I want to say that clearly before I say anything else, because Lily is not the subject of what I am about to describe, and she is not responsible for any of it. In the months before Lily was born, before anyone knew what her health situation would be, a routine prenatal test had flagged a potential kidney abnormality. The doctors had said it might resolve, it might not. They would know more after birth. They had also said, in the cautious way of doctors outlining possibilities, that in a worst-case scenario, a donor kidney might eventually be needed. This information reached my family in a form I can only describe as distorted, because by the time it circulated through the family group chat and arrived at my mother, the doctors in a worst-case scenario had become, "She will definitely need a kidney," and the eventually had become, "as soon as possible," and the natural next question, in my mother's way of thinking, was who in the family was going to provide it. She landed on me, not because my blood type was a match. She had not yet asked about blood types. Not because I had expressed any willingness or capacity for organ donation, or any particular expertise in medical matters, or any connection to Lily's health situation beyond being her aunt. She landed on me because I was the one in the family without children of my own, and in my mother's accounting, not having children meant not having the same claim on my own body that a parent would have. I was, in her framework, available. The person whose life had fewer consequences, and therefore fewer reasons to protect it from sacrifice. I have thought about this framing many times since, the idea that the absence of certain life circumstances makes a person more available for certain asks. The logic is not entirely without internal consistency. If you believe that the value of a kidney is measured by the dependence it sustains, then a kidney sustaining a person who has dependence is worth more than one sustaining a person who does not. The logic holds if you accept the premise. I do not accept the premise. My body is not a resource to be allocated by household, but I understand the calculation my mother was running, because she had been running versions of it my entire life. The calculation that determines how much each member of the family is owed based on their position and circumstances, rather than their personhood. I have a condition called IgA nephropathy. It is an autoimmune disease that affects the kidneys by depositing antibodies in the glomeruli, the small filtering units, which causes inflammation and progressive damage over time. Mine was diagnosed when I was 24, after a period of symptoms that I had been explaining away for 2 years as stress and fatigue, before a routine blood panel showed something that my doctor did not want to explain away. My right kidney has not functioned at more than 30% capacity for 5 years. This is not a temporary state. It is the current and likely permanent state, managed with medication and monitored at quarterly nephrology appointments to ensure it does not deteriorate further. My left kidney is compensating, doing the work of 2 kidneys, and doing it well enough that I live a normal life. I watch my diet. I do not drink. I take my medications at the same time every day. I am careful in the way that a person with one effective kidney has to be careful, which is not dramatically careful, just consistently careful. The nephrologist I had consulted, before the first Sunday dinner, had been clear. Donating a kidney was not a medically viable option for me. It would leave me with a partially functioning kidney, doing the work of an entire renal system, and the likely outcome over years was dialysis. This was not a gray area. This was the assessment of a doctor who had been treating my condition for 4 years and who was not given to overstatement. I had shared this condition with my family many times over the preceding 5 years. They had received the information. They had not retained it in a form that made it relevant when the subject of organ donation arose, because receiving information and integrating it into your model of a person are different processes, and the second one requires considering the person as a full subject rather than as a resource. The first Sunday dinner in question was the second week of March. I had not known the topic was on the agenda. We were at Owen's table, his dining room, the one with the large windows facing the garden, the one where we had eaten 100 Sunday dinners before this one. Owen had made the lamb roast he made on the Sundays when he had the energy for it, which was less often than it used to be, but still regular enough to feel like a tradition. There were 7 of us. The food was good. For the first 40 minutes, everything was ordinary. My mother brought it up between the main course and the dessert, with the directness she uses when she has decided a conversation needs to happen, and she is not going to let the timing determine whether it does. She said the family needed to talk about what they were going to do for Lily. She said the prenatal tests were indicating a serious situation, and the doctors were not optimistic. She said that families take care of each other, and that this was a situation where taking care of each other meant something concrete and specific. She said organ donation was something the family had the capacity to offer if they were willing to make the sacrifice. She looked at me when she said sacrifice. Everyone else looked at me too. Owen did not look at me. He looked at the table, and then out the window at his garden, and then he picked up his fork. I said, as clearly as I could, I have 1 working kidney. I have IgA nephropathy. I I cannot donate a kidney without almost certain medical consequence to myself. This is not a choice I am making out of unwillingness. This is a medical reality. My mother said that the doctors hadn't said it was impossible. I said my nephrologist had told me it was contraindicated and would likely put me on a path toward dialysis within years. My father said that medical outcomes were hard to predict. My brother-in-law said that families made sacrifices for each other. Owen, at the head of the table, said nothing for a long moment, and then he said enough in the quiet version, and the subject moved on. But it had been said, and it sat on the table the way things sit when they have been said and not resolved. The following Sunday it came back. My mother had, in the intervening week, done research of a kind. She had found articles about live kidney donation recovery rates, about people who lived full lives with one kidney. She presented this information as though it addressed my situation. It did not, because those articles were about people beginning with 2 functioning kidneys. I explain this again. The explanation was received in the way explanations are received when a decision has already been made, and the explanation is being categorized as resistance rather than information. Beth said nothing at either dinner. I want to be precise about this. Beth did not pressure me. She sat at the table and let it happen around her, which is not the same thing, but it is a different thing. At the second dinner, at some point in the middle of the conversation, I was shaking. Not visibly, I think. Not in a way anyone pointed to or named. Internally, the way your body does when it is processing something your mind has not finished categorizing. The specific feeling of sitting across from people who love you and watching them look directly at a fact about your health and classify it as obstruction. Watching them receive the information and choose, in real time, not to incorporate it. My mother had brought printouts. She had brought articles about kidney donation recovery and living donors who reported no decline in quality of life. She laid them on the table next to the dessert plates. I looked at them. The articles were real. They were also about people who had started with 2 functioning kidneys, which I had explained the previous week and was now explaining again, and the explaining was being received as a different kind of refusal than the medical one I was actually making. At some point I put my hands flat on the table, which is what I do when I am making sure my voice will be level, and I said, as plainly as I could, this is not something my body can do. The answer is no. It will remain no, regardless of what information is brought to the table, because the information that matters, my nephrologist's assessment, my own functioning kidney, the reality of what I am and am not able to give, has already been given, and nothing being said here changes it. My grandfather, at the head of the table, said enough, the quiet version. The version that means the conversation is finished. He drove me home. He did not say anything about the dinner. I went upstairs. I sat in my kitchen for an hour before I could sleep. That was the last Sunday dinner where anyone brought up the kidney. I do not know precisely what Owen said to them after he dropped me off, or what happened in conversations I was not in. I know the subject stopped coming up with me. I know that when I came to Sunday dinners after that, and I did come, because Owen's Sunday dinners were Owen's Sunday dinners and I was not going to stop going, nothing was said about it directly, and the table found other things to talk about. 6 months later, on a Thursday morning in September, Owen died in his sleep. He had gone to bed the night before having read his book and watered his garden and called his sister in Arizona, which was something he did every Thursday evening. He had gone to sleep and he had not woken up, which was, as nearly as these things can be, the death he had told me once he hoped for. The reading of his will was 6 weeks after. The first time I heard the word codicil was when Patricia Morse said it. 14th of March, 1 week after the second dinner. My mother, in the conference room, was asking Patricia Morse whether the codicil could be contested. Patricia Morse explained, patiently and without evident judgment, that the codicil was fully executed, properly witnessed, and entirely within Owen's legal authority to make. My father had his hands flat on the table. Beth was looking at the window. I was looking at the date. The date is the thing. Owen had been meaning to update his estate planning for years. He had mentioned it in passing on several occasions, in the offhand way of a man who knew he should attend to something and had not yet made it urgent. He made it urgent in the week of the 14th. The week after I was shaking at his table. He saw something. He saw it clearly. My grandfather saw things clearly. It was the professional habit of a lifetime of scientific observation, the practice of seeing how systems actually work, rather than how people wish they work. He saw what was being asked of me and what I was being told about my own medical reality and what the family's response to that reality was. He saw it at both dinners, from the head of the table, and he did not argue about it. He drove me home and talked about his novel, and in the week after, he called Patricia Morse. He did not tell me he loved me more than the others. He did not make a speech about my courage or his disapproval of what had been said at his table. He simply changed what was possible for me, quietly and permanently, and then he went back to reading his novel and tending his garden and dying in September in the way he had hoped to. I miss him every day, not for the trust. The trust is significant, and I am still in the process of understanding what it means for my life, what I want to do with it, how to hold it without letting it define me in a way Owen would have found excessive. He was not a man who wanted things to define people. He was a man who wanted people to be able to live clearly, with the information they needed, in the conditions that were right for them. I miss him because he was the person in my family who saw things as they were, rather than as he needed them to be. Who told the truth about what he observed, quietly and without ceremony, through the decisions he made rather than the words he said. Who looked at the table on 2 Sunday evenings in March and understood what was happening without requiring anyone to explain it to him, because he had been a scientist for 40 years and observation was the thing he did before everything else. Those people are not replaceable. You do not find substitutes for the specific person who saw things as they were and acted on what they saw. You find the shape of the absence and you learn to account for it, which is different from filling it, and which takes longer than you expect, and which is its own kind of work. At the conference table, after the questions had run out and Patricia Morse had explained what there was to explain, the room went quiet in a different way. The earlier quiet had been the quiet of shock. This quiet was the quiet of a room sitting with something that could not be argued with, because it was not an opinion. It was a document, notarized, witnessed, dated, filed. It said what it said. It said it in the week of the 14th of March, which was the week after I refused. Beth and I had coffee 2 weeks after the reading. She came to my apartment and we sat in the kitchen, and she said she was sorry before she sat down, standing in my kitchen in her coat, because she had not yet taken it off and she did not want to say what she came to say while seated. She said she had known the pressure was wrong at the first dinner and had said nothing at either one, and she was sorry. She said it clearly, without self-pity, in the way of a person who has thought about exactly what they want to say and is saying it. I told her I believed her. I told her that sorry was a real thing, and I was receiving it as the real thing it was. I told her I did not need her to explain more than she had explained, or to keep apologizing beyond the apology she had made, because the apology was complete, and continuing it would make it about her discomfort rather than my experience. We are building something, cautiously, with the specific care of 2 people who understand that something happened and who are deciding, deliberately, to continue. I am not in a hurry. The rebuilding will take as long as it takes. My relationship with my parents is different now. We speak. We are not estranged. There are dinners, though not at Owen's table. His house was sold in the spring, and the new owners have painted it a color he would not have chosen. We eat at my parents' place or at a restaurant, and the conversations are careful in the specific way of people who have acquired information about each other that makes carelessness less available. There is an honesty in the current version of things that was not there before. Not the honesty of people who have said everything that needs to be said. We have not said everything, and some of it may never be said directly, but the honesty of 2 people who understand what the other is capable of and are choosing to continue anyway with that knowledge fully present. I prefer this to what we had before, which was closeness built on a version of me that excluded the parts my family found inconvenient: my health, my circumstances, my capacity to say no. Lily is 3. She does not have kidney disease. The concern resolved after birth, as the doctors had said it might. She is healthy and specific about her opinions, which I find entirely correct for a 3-year-old. I love her with the specific love you have for children who are not responsible for the circumstances of their arrival. My grandfather saw what was happening at his table, and he did something about it. He did not ask me whether I wanted him to act. He did not wait to see how the situation resolved, or whether the family would come to a different conclusion on its own. He made a phone call and signed a document, and then he let the document be what it was: permanent, quiet, waiting. The trust is real. $9.2 million, held by a trustee, available to me under the terms Owen set. I have spent a year understanding what that means and what I want to do with it, and I am not finished understanding it. What I know is that it represents a kind of security I had not had before, not the showy security of visible wealth, but the specific security of a person who has options, who can make choices about work and living and time from a position that is not primarily defined by necessity, who can, if she needs to, manage her medical situation without the pressure of the financial calculation competing with the medical one. Owen knew what my medical situation was. He had listened when I explained it, over years, in the way he listened to things, with full attention, without immediately trying to solve what he was hearing. He knew that IgA nephropathy is progressive and unpredictable and expensive to manage, and that the trajectory of it over time was not something I could fully know in advance. He knew that the thing that would most change the conditions of that trajectory was having room, financial room, decision room, the room to manage the thing as it needed to be managed without compromising elsewhere. He gave me the room, not because I had been pressured into deserving it, because I had needed it, and he had seen that clearly, and he had done something about it. That is what I carry. Here is what I carry from all of this. There are people who show love by saying they love you, and there are people who show it by rearranging what is possible for you, without announcement, without requiring that you thank them or acknowledge the rearranging, or even know it happened. Owen was the second kind. He had been the second kind for 30 years. In smaller expressions I can see clearly now that I know how to look for them. The book he sent me the week I was diagnosed, with a note that said only the title of a chapter he thought I should read. The phone call the month I lost a job, where he asked a single question and then listened for an hour. The way he always remembered exactly what I had told him the previous time, and asked about it the next time, which is the rarest form of attention, and the one that costs the most. The codicil was the largest expression of a pattern that had always been there. He did not change when he signed it. He was being exactly who he had always been, and I had 30 years of evidence that this was exactly who that was, and it was enough to build a life on. You do not always know who is watching. You do not always know who has seen what happened at the table, and is, in the week after, quietly rearranging the architecture of what is possible for you. You cannot ask for this kind of love. You cannot engineer it or request it or negotiate for it. It happens when a particular kind of person occupies a position from which they can see what is happening and chooses to do something about it, rather than waiting for the situation to resolve on its own. What you can do is be that kind of person for someone else. This is not complicated, as Owen demonstrated. You do not have to make a speech. You do not have to confront the people who are doing the thing, or declare your position, or put yourself in the middle of a family situation in a way that requires ongoing management. You have to see the situation clearly, decide what is true about it, and then do the thing that is yours to do. Owen's thing was a phone call to Patricia Morse. Your thing will be whatever it is. The size of it does not matter as much as the doing of it. Be the person who makes the phone call that week, not when the situation has settled, not when it is more convenient. That week, because that week is when you saw it, and what you saw is what makes the action necessary. And waiting means deciding that what you saw was not quite enough to act on, and it was enough. It was enough when you saw it. Owen drove me home and talked about his book. He asked one question about my work. He let me out at my building and said goodnight with the specific warmth of a man who has done what he came to do, and does not need to mark the doing of it. In the week after that, he called Patricia Morse. He signed a document. He dated it the 14th of March. He did not tell anyone. He went back to his novel and his garden and his Thursday phone calls to his sister in Arizona, and his Sunday dinners and the marine conservation news that he had been following for 30 years. He lived the remaining 6 months of his life the way he had lived his life generally, attending to things without narrating the attending. The 14th would say what the 14th said. He trusted the document to do the work. That is the entirety of what he did, and it was enough. It was exactly enough. The 14th is the thing. Everything else is just what the document says. Owen drove me home and talked about his novel. He let me out at my building and said goodnight. He did not say anything else, because he had already done the thing that needed to be done, and a man who has already done the thing does not need to narrate it. He just says goodnight and goes home and reads his novel and tends his garden and trusts the 14th to do the work. If this story found you tonight, subscribe so the next one reaches you. Every week I tell another story about someone who was seen by the right person at the right moment, and I would hate for the next one to miss you. And tell me in the comments, who made the phone call for you? Who rearranged the architecture without making a speech about it? Name them down there. Let's fill this section with their names. I'll be reading every one.